A man travels to Tokyo seeking answers after his brother's brutal murder, uncovering a deadly Yakuza conspiracy. But just as he closes in on the truth, he realizes the real enemy has been watching him all along. Jack Carter sat frozen, the phone trembling in his hand as the words repeated in his mind. His younger brother, David, had been murdered in Tokyo. The detective on the other end of the line was sympathetic yet distant, offering little beyond basic details. "We're investigating," the man said. But for Jack, the platitudes didn't matter. Nothing could. 2 days later, Jack stepped off a plane into Narita International Airport. The Tokyo air felt heavy, the city's neon brilliance a stark contrast to the darkness clouding his heart. He navigated the labyrinthine streets until he reached David's modest apartment building. The sight of it made the loss real. The door to the apartment had been forced open, its lock shattered. Inside, the once organized space was a wreck. Drawers hung half open, clothes and papers scattered across the floor. Jack's chest tightened as he surveyed the chaos, his mind racing. Who would do this? Among the debris, Jack's eyes caught a leather-bound book, peeking out from beneath an overturned chair. He bent down and picked it up, recognizing it as David's journal. As he flipped through its pages, a pattern emerged. Notes, addresses, and names. The Yakuza. Jack's brow furrowed. What had his brother gotten himself into? The final entries were the most chilling. David had written about receiving threats and feeling watched. His words hinted at a dangerous investigation that involved illegal activities and powerful figures. Jack clenched the journal tightly. His brother hadn't just been a victim, he had been silenced. Later that evening, Jack attended the somber funeral. As strangers offered condolences, he felt disconnected, like an intruder in his brother's life. The ceremony was brief, and as the last guest departed, Jack stood alone by the grave, his resolve hardening. "I won't let them get away with this, David," he whispered. Returning to the apartment, Jack combed through the journal again. It was a roadmap of sorts, pointing to key locations David had visited in his final days. A luxury club, a warehouse, and a series of cryptic initials were scrawled in the margins. Each clue deepened the mystery. As Jack packed the journal into his bag, a shadow moved outside the window. He rushed to look, but whoever had been there was gone. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He was being watched. Jack's grief transformed into a burning determination. He didn't know much about the Yakuza or the world his brother had uncovered, but he wasn't about to let fear stop him. The first step was clear. Follow David's trail and uncover the truth, no matter how dangerous. Jack walked through the bustling streets of Tokyo, the weight of his brother's journal pressing against his chest. Neon signs flickered above, casting an eerie glow on the crowded sidewalks. Every passerby felt like a potential threat, every shadow a reminder of the danger he faced. He clutched the journal tightly, scanning David's notes again. One name stood out repeatedly, the Velvet Lotus, a high-end club allegedly linked to the Yakuza. It was his first stop. The club was nestled in an upscale district, its entrance marked by a crimson lantern and 2 suited guards. Jack adjusted his collar and walked in, the pulse of deep bass vibrating in his chest. Inside, chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, casting golden light over wealthy patrons and silent hostesses in silk dresses. He moved through the crowd, scanning the faces. David had been here. He had spoken to someone important. At the bar, Jack ordered a drink and observed. Minutes passed before his eyes met a woman sitting alone in a corner booth. She had sharp, calculating eyes and an air of quiet confidence. Something in her demeanor told Jack she wasn't just another patron. Taking a deep breath, he approached her table. "I think you knew my brother," he said, sliding David's photo across the table. The woman's eyes flickered with recognition, but she remained composed. "David Carter," she said, her voice smooth but wary. "Why are you here?" "Looking for answers," Jack replied. "I found his journal. He was investigating something dangerous." She exhaled slowly, her gaze shifting toward the entrance before returning to him. "My name is Aiko Tanaka," she said, lowering her voice. "I used to be a detective, your brother. He was onto something bigger than he realized." Jack leaned in. "Tell me what you know." Aiko hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "David came to me a few months ago, convinced the Yakuza were running more than just clubs and gambling. He was right. Smuggling, trafficking, things that go beyond what the police can or will handle." She eyed Jack carefully. "You shouldn't be here." Jack's jaw tightened. "David's dead because of this. I can't just walk away." Aiko studied him for a long moment before nodding. All right, but if we do this, we do it my way. Jack exhaled, relief mingling with tension. What's our next move? Aiko's eyes darkened. There's a warehouse mentioned in his notes. It's where he found something important. We start there. As they stood to leave, a man across the club lifted his phone, subtly snapping a photo of them. Jack felt the hairs on his neck rise again. They were being watched. Without a word, Aiko led him through a back exit into the cold Tokyo night. The investigation had begun, and Jack knew there was no turning back. Jack followed Aiko through the narrow alleys of Tokyo, the distant hum of traffic masking their hurried footsteps. The air was thick with tension, and Jack's mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. Aiko's expression was unreadable, but he could sense the weight of experience behind her every move. She led him to a rusted chain-link fence bordering an old industrial complex. "This is it," she whispered, nodding toward a dimly lit warehouse. David mentioned this place several times in his notes. Jack peered through the fence. The building loomed in the darkness, its exterior weathered and silent. Aiko slipped a lockpick from her pocket and worked the gate open with practiced ease. They moved inside, sticking to the shadows. The warehouse smelled of oil and damp wood. Crates were stacked high, marked with unfamiliar symbols. Jack crouched by a crate and pried it open, revealing rows of tightly packed packages. He pulled one out and peeled back the wrapping. Inside, rows of small, unmarked vials glinted under the flickering overhead light. His gut twisted. "This isn't just drugs," Aiko murmured, holding up a vial. "It's human trafficking, medical exploitation. Your brother stumbled onto something huge." Before Jack could respond, footsteps echoed from the far end of the warehouse. He barely had time to react before the first figure emerged, a burly man in a suit, his face partially obscured by shadows. More followed, their intentions clear in their steely glares. Aiko tensed beside him. "Nakamura's men," she muttered. "Kazuo Nakamura, David's prime suspect." Jack clenched his fists. No time for caution. One of the men barked in Japanese, and without hesitation, Aiko struck first. She lunged at the nearest thug, her movements swift and precise. Jack followed suit, dodging a wild punch and landing a solid hit to his attacker's jaw. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Jack fought with raw determination, using whatever he could grab: wooden planks, metal pipes. His muscles ached with every strike, but adrenaline pushed him forward. Aiko's efficiency was almost surgical, taking down opponents with fluidity. In the frenzy, Jack spotted a stack of files atop a desk. He grabbed them just as Aiko yelled, "We need to go!" Dodging a final swing, Jack followed her through a side exit. They sprinted down the alley, their breaths ragged. Behind them, the shouts of Nakamura's men faded into the distance. They stopped several blocks away, ducking into an abandoned storefront. Jack flipped through the stolen documents, his heart pounding. Names, dates, and shipment records. It was all there. "This is enough to tie Nakamura to trafficking," Aiko said, wiping sweat from her brow. "But it won't be enough to take him down." Jack's grip tightened on the papers. "Then we find more." Aiko looked at him, a mixture of respect and concern in her eyes. "You're in this for real now, aren't you?" Jack met her gaze. "I have to be." In the shadows of Tokyo, the fight for justice had only just begun. Jack sat in the dimly lit safe house, flipping through the stolen documents with a growing sense of unease. Each page painted a grim picture of corruption and criminal enterprise, far beyond what he had initially imagined. Aiko paced nearby, her eyes sharp and calculating. "These files confirm what David suspected," she said, tapping a sheet filled with coded transactions. "Kazuo Nakamura isn't just moving drugs and people. He's got high-level protection." Jack frowned. "Protection from who?" Aiko exhaled slowly, pulling out a USB drive from her coat pocket. "Before David died, he sent me this. I didn't look at it until now." She plugged the drive into her laptop, and a series of video files popped up. Clicking on one, the screen flickered to life. The footage was grainy but clear enough to reveal a clandestine meeting. Kazuo Nakamura sat across from men in suits, politicians and senior law enforcement officials. They spoke in hushed tones, discussing shipments and payouts. Jack's stomach churned. "They're all in on it." Aiko nodded grimly. "David recorded this at great risk. He wanted to go public but didn't know who to trust." She glanced at Jack. "Now you see why this isn't just about revenge. It's about exposing an entire system." Jack clenched his jaw. The conspiracy extended far beyond Nakamura. If they moved too soon, they could be silenced before they had a chance to act. He ran a hand through his hair. So what's our move? Aiko sat down beside him. We need leverage. More evidence, witnesses, anything that can't be ignored. Nakamura will come after us, and we need to be prepared. Jack scanned the documents again, his eyes landing on a familiar name. What about this? He pointed to an entry listing a location, an underground club frequented by Tokyo's elite. If David was investigating this place, it could hold more answers. Aiko hesitated, then nodded. It's dangerous, but it's our best lead. Jack's mind raced. We'll hit it tonight. The longer we wait, the colder the trail gets. Aiko studied him for a moment before agreeing. We'll need backup. Jack knew she was right, but finding someone they could trust in a city where corruption ran so deep wouldn't be easy. Aiko shut the laptop. We should move. Jack stood, the weight of David's legacy pressing on his shoulders. He was no longer just looking for answers. He was stepping into a war against forces far more powerful than he had anticipated. As they left the safe house, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. In the dark corners of Tokyo, the enemy was always one step ahead. Jack and Aiko moved cautiously through the neon-drenched streets of Shinjuku, the glow of the city masking the tension that simmered between them. Their next destination was a high-end izakaya tucked away in a quiet alley, a place mentioned multiple times in David's notes. According to what they had pieced together, it served as an unofficial meeting spot for mid-level Yakuza operatives. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with cigarette smoke and whispered conversations. Jack scanned the room, his gaze settling on a lone figure at the bar, a young man with sharp features, nursing a drink and darting nervous glances around. Aiko whispered, "That's Ryu Saito. He's been with the Yakuza for years," but David suspected he was having doubts. Jack approached carefully, sitting beside Ryu and ordering a drink. Without looking at him, Jack slid a napkin across the counter with a single word scribbled, "David." Ryu stiffened, his eyes narrowing. "Who the hell are you?" he muttered under his breath. "I'm his brother," Jack said evenly. "I know what he was working on. I know he came to you." Ryu stared into his glass, his jaw tightening. "He shouldn't have, but he did," Jack pressed. "And now he's dead." Silence stretched between them before Ryu exhaled sharply. "You shouldn't be here," he said, shaking his head. "Nakamura has eyes everywhere." Aiko leaned in. "We need your help. You know more than you're letting on." Ryu laughed bitterly. "Help? If they find out I'm even talking to you, I'll be floating in the bay by morning." He took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly. "But I can't keep looking the other way, not after what they did to David." Jack's grip on his glass tightened. "Then tell us what you know." After a long pause, Ryu nodded. "Nakamura's got a shipment coming in tomorrow night. Big one. They're using an old shipping yard in Odaiba. It's not just weapons and drugs this time." His voice dropped. "People, women, children. They're moving them out of the city before things get too hot." Jack exchanged a glance with Aiko. This was it, the evidence they needed to start bringing Nakamura down. But Ryu wasn't finished. "I want out," he said, his voice low and desperate. "If I help you, I need protection. They'll come after me." Jack hesitated, weighing his options. He didn't trust Ryu completely, but they needed him. "Help us stop this shipment and I'll make sure you get out." Ryu studied him for a moment before nodding. "Meet me tomorrow at the docks, midnight, but if I see anything off, I'm gone." Jack stood, feeling the weight of the deal settle in his chest. "You won't regret it." As he and Aiko stepped out into the Tokyo night, she gave him a sidelong glance. "You sure about him?" "No," Jack admitted. "But we don't have a choice." The battle against Nakamura was escalating and they were running out of time. Jack and Aiko arrived at the docks just before midnight, the cold air thick with the scent of salt and diesel. Towering shipping containers loomed around them like silent sentinels, and the distant hum of the city seemed worlds away. Jack's pulse quickened as he scanned the area, his eyes searching for Ryu. "He said he'd be here," Aiko murmured, her hand resting lightly on the concealed weapon under her coat. Moments later, Ryu emerged from the shadows, his face tense. He glanced around nervously before approaching them. "You came," he said in a low voice. "Good." Jack didn't waste time. "Where's the shipment?" Ryu pointed toward a cluster of containers farther down the pier. Inside, Nakamura's men are guarding it heavily, but I have a way in. Jack exchanged a glance with Aiko. Something felt off, but they had no choice but to push forward. Ryu led them along the edge of the dock, keeping to the shadows. The hum of distant voices grew louder, and Jack's gut tightened with anticipation. As they rounded a corner, Ryu suddenly stopped, raising a hand. "Wait," he whispered. "I need to—" Before he could finish, floodlights blazed to life, blinding Jack and Aiko. The air filled with shouts in Japanese, and within seconds, armed men surrounded them. Jack's heart dropped. "It's a trap!" Aiko hissed, reaching for her gun. Ryu stepped back, his face twisted with guilt. "I had no choice," he said, his voice shaking. "They threatened my family." Jack barely had time to react before a punch landed square in his gut, doubling him over. Aiko fought back fiercely, taking down 2 men before she was overwhelmed. Jack struggled against his captors, but the fight was over before it had truly begun. Kazuo Nakamura stepped forward from the shadows, his sharp suit immaculate, his expression one of cold amusement. "You Carter brothers never know when to quit," he said in perfect English. Jack glared at him, chest heaving. "You'll pay for what you did to David." Kazuo smirked. "Brave words, but I think you'll find your situation hopeless." He nodded to his men. "Take them." Aiko was dragged away, fighting every step, while Jack was shoved to his knees. His mind raced for options, but escape seemed impossible. Ryu avoided his gaze, his face etched with shame. Kazuo knelt beside Jack, his voice a deadly whisper. "You should have stayed out of this." With that, he stood and walked away, leaving his men to finish the job. As the first blow struck Jack's ribs, he forced himself to focus on one thing: escaping. Aiko was in their hands now, and he wouldn't leave her behind. Blood dripped from his lip as he was dragged toward a waiting vehicle. His vision blurred, but his resolve remained crystal clear. This wasn't over. Not yet. Jack groaned as he slowly regained consciousness, the dull ache in his ribs reminding him of the brutal beating he had endured. He lay on a cold concrete floor in a dimly lit room, the faint hum of machinery echoing in the background. His hands were bound behind his back, the rope biting into his wrists. Blinking through the haze of pain, he took in his surroundings, an abandoned warehouse, likely one of Nakamura's many hideouts. He cursed under his breath. Aiko was gone, taken by Nakamura's men, and Ryu's betrayal stung worse than his injuries. He forced himself to focus. What would David do? Jack leaned back against the wall, steadying his breathing, replaying the events in his mind. He had been reckless, too eager for revenge, and it had cost him. But this wasn't just about avenging his brother anymore. Aiko was in danger, and countless innocent lives were at stake. He needed to think clearly. Aiko's words echoed in his mind. "This isn't just about one man, Jack. It's about stopping a machine." Jack clenched his fists. He had been so blinded by grief that he failed to see the bigger picture. Nakamura was just one piece of a larger network of corruption and exploitation. Taking him down would only be the beginning. His thoughts were interrupted by the distant sound of voices. Straining to listen, he recognized Ryu's voice, low, uncertain. Jack's jaw tightened. Despite the betrayal, there was hesitation in Ryu's actions. Maybe there was still a chance to turn him back. He had to find a way out of this. Shifting his weight, Jack felt the rough edges of a loose floorboard beneath him. With careful, deliberate movements, he maneuvered his bindings against it, slowly fraying the rope. Minutes passed like hours, his pulse steadying with each careful motion. Finally, the rope gave way. Jack exhaled in relief, massaging his sore wrists before creeping toward the exit. He peeked through a crack in the door, spotting 2 guards stationed outside. "Think, Jack, think." Spotting an old rusted pipe nearby, he grabbed it, pressing his back against the wall. The door creaked open slightly as one guard peeked inside. In a swift motion, Jack struck hard, knocking the man unconscious. He caught the second guard off guard, landing a punch that sent him sprawling. Without wasting time, Jack searched the unconscious guard's pockets and found a phone. He scrolled quickly, finding recent messages, an address, a time. It was a lead. Stuffing the phone into his pocket, Jack slipped out into the cool night air. He needed allies, and fast. Aiko's life depended on it. As he disappeared into the Tokyo night, his mind was made up. This wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about justice. Jack moved through the back streets of Tokyo, his body aching, but his mind sharper than ever. The phone he had taken from the guard contained a crucial lead, an address in Shibara, a port district known for its heavy industrial activity and discreet shipping operations. It was their next move, but he couldn't do it alone. He found Ryu waiting at their agreed meeting spot, a rundown internet cafe on the outskirts of the city. The young Yakuza looked uneasy, his fingers tapping restlessly on the table. Jack sat down across from him, his eyes hard and unforgiving. "You sold us out," Jack said, his voice low but edged with fury. "Why should I trust you now?" Ryu looked away, shame written across his face. "I didn't have a choice. Nakamura threatened my family, but I couldn't go through with it." He swallowed hard. "I can help you get Aiko back." Jack studied him for a long moment. He wanted to walk away, to leave Ryu to the mess he had created, but deep down, he knew they needed him. "Then prove it," Jack said. Ryu nodded, sliding a hastily drawn map across the table. "The port facility in Shibara. Nakamura's keeping Aiko in one of the storage units there. They're preparing to move her. Tonight." Jack's grip tightened on the map. "Then we hit them first." With Ryu's inside knowledge and Aiko's earlier intel, Jack formulated a plan. They would infiltrate the port, create a distraction, and extract Aiko before Nakamura could move her. It was risky, but there was no other option. Hours later, they approached the port under the cover of darkness. Rows of shipping containers stretched endlessly under the harsh floodlights. Jack and Ryu moved swiftly, sticking to the shadows. Ryu pointed toward a cluster of containers guarded by several armed men. "She's in there," he whispered. Jack pulled out a small charge of C4 they had acquired from one of Ryu's connections and attached it to a distant fuel drum. "When this blows, they'll come running. We move in fast." Ryu gave a curt nod. Jack triggered the explosion, and the entire port erupted into chaos. Alarms blared, and guards rushed toward the fiery distraction. Jack and Ryu sprinted to the target container, dispatching the few remaining guards with swift, brutal efficiency. Jack forced the container door open, finding Aiko bound but conscious. Relief flashed in her eyes as Jack cut through her restraints. "Took you long enough," she muttered, standing with a grimace. "No time for reunions," Jack said, handing her a gun. "Let's finish this." As they made their way out, gunfire erupted behind them. Nakamura's men had realized the deception. Jack covered Aiko and Ryu as they weaved through the maze of containers, bullets whizzing past them. They reached the edge of the port, but Nakamura's reinforcements were closing in fast. Aiko glanced at Jack. "We're not getting out of here clean." Jack nodded, his jaw set. "Then we take them down here." Using the stolen documents, they torched Nakamura's shipments, sending a clear message. His empire was crumbling. As they escaped into the night, Jack knew the fight was far from over. But for now, they had struck a decisive blow. The warehouse in Shinjuku stood like a fortress beneath the glow of Tokyo's skyline. Jack crouched behind a rusted delivery truck, his breathing steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Beside him, Aiko checked her weapon with practiced precision, while Ryu wiped sweat from his brow, nerves evident despite his attempt to mask them with bravado. "This is it," Jack murmured, eyes fixed on the compound's entrance. "Kazuo's inside." Aiko nodded. "We do this clean, in and out, no unnecessary risks." Ryu shifted uneasily. "You're assuming Nakamura is going to let us walk out of here." Jack smirked grimly. "He won't." They moved silently through the shadows, slipping past distracted guards as the distant hum of traffic provided cover for their approach. Jack's mind replayed the events that led them here. David's murder, the ambush at the docks, and Ryu's betrayal turned alliance. It had all built up to this moment. Tonight, it ended. Aiko led them to a side entrance, picking the lock in seconds. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit corridor lined with crates and surveillance monitors. Jack motioned for silence as they crept forward. Aiko pointed to a live feed on one of the monitors. Kazuo was in an office upstairs, flanked by two armed men. Jack's grip on his gun tightened. "We split up. Aiko, take the ground floor and disable the alarms. Ryu, you cover our exit. I'll handle Nakamura." Aiko hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "Be careful." Jack didn't answer. He was already moving. Scaling the staircase 2 steps at a time, Jack pressed himself against the wall outside the office, his pulse hammering in his ears. Through the frosted glass, he could see Kazuo pacing, speaking into a phone. Jack took a deep breath, then kicked the door open, gun drawn. Kazuo didn't flinch. He ended his call with an eerie calm, placing the phone down and turning to face Jack. His bodyguards moved instantly, drawing their weapons. But Jack fired first, dropping them both with precise shots. Kazuo raised his hands, a smug smile playing on his lips. "Jack Carter," he said smoothly. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Jack stepped forward, gun aimed at Kazuo's chest. "You killed my brother." Kazuo's expression didn't waver. "Your brother was reckless. He stuck his nose where it didn't belong." He gestured to the files scattered across his desk. "But you're persistent. I respect that." Jack's jaw tightened. "Respect won't save you." Kazuo chuckled, slowly lowering his hands. "I think we both know you won't shoot me. You need me alive to get to the real players." Jack hesitated for a fraction of a second, just enough time for Kazuo to lunge. The gun went off, the shot grazing Kazuo's shoulder, but he was undeterred. He tackled Jack, sending them both crashing into the desk. Papers and files scattered as they wrestled for control. Kazuo was stronger than Jack anticipated, but Jack fought with a raw fury that came from months of grief and rage. He landed a solid punch to Kazuo's ribs, then another to his jaw. Kazuo staggered back, blood dripping from his lip. Jack raised his gun again, but Kazuo lunged for a hidden knife on his belt, slashing wildly. Jack barely dodged in time, the blade slicing through his jacket. With a growl, he kicked Kazuo's knee, sending him to the ground. Breathing hard, Jack leveled the gun at him once more. "Where are the files on your bosses?" Kazuo spat blood, grinning despite the pain. "Even if I told you, it wouldn't matter. You're nothing but a speck in their world." Jack's finger tightened on the trigger. "Then I'll start by taking out the speck." Before he could fire, Aiko's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Jack, we've got company. Get out, now." Kazuo seized the distraction, lunging at Jack one last time. They crashed against the window, the glass shattering as they both teetered on the edge. Jack fought for balance, but Kazuo's weight dragged him forward. In a final desperate move, Jack shoved Kazuo with all his strength. The Yakuza boss's eyes widened in shock as he tumbled backward, falling 3 stories to the ground below with a sickening thud. Jack stared down, chest heaving. Kazuo Nakamura lay motionless, his empire shattered along with him. Aiko's voice cut through the haze. "Jack, move!" He turned and ran, meeting Aiko and Ryu in the corridor. Ryu's face was pale. "They're coming," he panted. "We have to go." Jack led the way, ducking through gunfire as Nakamura's remaining men scrambled to retaliate. They weaved through the labyrinth of crates, bullets ricocheting off metal surfaces. Reaching the exit, they piled into a waiting car. Aiko floored the accelerator, tires screeching as they sped away from the chaos. In the rearview mirror, Jack watched as the warehouse burned behind them, a fitting end to Kazuo Nakamura's reign. As the adrenaline faded, Jack leaned back, closing his eyes for a brief moment. It was over. At least this chapter was. Aiko glanced at him. "What now?" Jack opened his eyes, staring out at the Tokyo skyline. "Now, we go after the ones pulling the strings." The streets of Tokyo felt different now. The towering neon signs and bustling crowds were the same, but to Jack Carter, everything had changed. He stood on the balcony of a small apartment Aiko had secured for them, staring at the city that had claimed his brother's life, and nearly his own. The weight of the past few weeks hung heavily on his shoulders. Kazuo Nakamura was dead, his empire was in shambles. But as Jack had quickly learned, taking down one man didn't mean the war was over. The true architects of David's murder were still out there, hidden behind layers of influence, wealth, and corruption. Behind him, Aiko sat at a small table, meticulously going through the recovered documents they had salvaged from the burning warehouse. Her face was tense with concentration, and the soft glow of the desk lamp illuminated her sharp features. Ryu paced nervously across the room, occasionally glancing at the locked door as if expecting trouble. "They'll be coming after us," Ryu said for the 3rd time that hour. His voice was tight with fear. Kazuo was just a piece of the puzzle. There are others, bigger, more powerful. Jack turned, resting his forearms on the balcony rail. "Let them come." Aiko glanced up. "Jack, this isn't over. We've dealt a blow, but you saw the names on those files." She held up a page with a list of political figures and corporate executives. "These people won't just sit back and let us tear down their operation." Jack sighed, stepping inside. "I know." He looked at the document, recognizing some of the names David had jotted down in his journal. Men in suits, hidden behind respectable facades, pulling the strings of the Yakuza from the safety of their boardrooms. "We need to be smarter this time." Ryu ran a hand through his hair. Smarter? We barely made it out alive last time. I thought we were done. Jack's gaze hardened. We're not done until the people responsible for David's death pay. Aiko leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. And then what? What happens when you get them all? Will it bring David back? Jack didn't answer right away. He couldn't. The truth was, nothing would bring his brother back. Revenge wouldn't fill the void David left behind. But justice could prevent others from suffering the same fate. He walked over to the table and picked up one of the photographs they had recovered, a surveillance image of a high-level meeting between Yakuza leaders and prominent government officials. The real enemy wasn't just the Yakuza, it was the corruption that allowed them to thrive. We take the evidence public, Jack said, his voice resolute. No more back alley deals, no more sneaking around. We expose them for what they are. Aiko shook her head. Easier said than done. The media is compromised, the police, half of them are in their pockets. Jack's lips curled into a smirk. Then we find the ones who aren't, Ryu scoffed. And what? Just walk into a police station with this stuff? They'll kill us before we get through the door. Jack paced the room, thinking, no, we do it on our terms. We find someone with reach, someone who can't be silenced easily. He looked at Aiko. What about your old contacts? Aiko hesitated. There's one, a journalist, Mei Takahashi. She's been trying to expose corruption in the city for years, but getting to her won't be easy. Jack nodded. Then we make it happen. The next day, they set their plan into motion. Jack and Aiko headed to a small cafe where Mei was known to frequent, while Ryu stayed behind to monitor their comms. The cafe was quiet, a sharp contrast to the chaos that had become Jack's life. Mei was sitting by the window, sipping tea and typing furiously on her laptop. Aiko approached first. Mei! The journalist looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. Aiko, I thought you were... She trailed off, eyeing Jack warily. Aiko sat down across from her. It's a long story, but we need your help. Mei's expression turned skeptical. Help with what? Jack placed a USB drive on the table. Everything you've been looking for. Police corruption, government involvement, Yakuza operations. It's all here. Mei picked up the drive, her eyes narrowing. This could get me killed. Jack leaned in. Or it could change everything. Mei studied him for a moment before sighing. You have no idea what you're asking me to do. Jack's voice was steady. I do. My brother died trying to expose this. Mei glanced at Aiko, who gave a small nod. Finally, she pocketed the drive. I'll look into it, but if I'm doing this, I need assurances. Jack nodded. We'll keep you safe. As they left the cafe, Jack felt a weight lift off his shoulders. It wasn't over yet, but they had taken a step forward. Back at their safe house, Ryu greeted them with an anxious look. You think she'll actually publish it? Jack nodded. She will. Aiko crossed her arms. And what if it's not enough? Jack met her gaze. Then we keep pushing until it is. As they settled in for the night, Jack found himself holding David's journal once again. Flipping through the pages, he realized that his brother had started something far bigger than either of them had imagined. Jack's purpose was no longer just about revenge. It was about finishing what David started. Aiko joined him, sitting beside him on the worn couch. You're not going back to the States, are you? Jack shook his head. Not yet. She offered him a faint smile. Good. We could use you here. Jack stared out at the Tokyo skyline, the city's pulse steady and unrelenting. He didn't know how long this fight would take, but one thing was clear: he wasn't backing down. As dawn broke, his phone buzzed. A message from Mei. We're going public. Be ready. Jack took a deep breath, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The battle wasn't over, but they finally had a fighting chance. Sometimes, seeking justice means uncovering more than you ever expected. Jack's journey wasn't just about avenging his brother. It was about facing the dark realities of power, corruption, and betrayal. In the end, he had to ask himself, how far would he go to protect the truth, and what was he willing to sacrifice? What about you? If faced with the same choices, would you have the strength to keep going, or would you walk away? Click the video on your screen now to continue this journey of self-discovery and uncover more thrilling stories that challenge the boundaries of justice and revenge. Don't forget to subscribe and join us as we explore more gripping tales that make us question what we truly stand for.